Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day you're watching this. This is part 4 of my little party wall series. Part 1 we looked at a general introduction and looked at party structures. Part 2 was mainly adjacent excavations or adjoining excavations. And part 3 was basically a who's who are the owners, who are the surveyors, and who can act and who's defined as each. So finally going to get on to part 4 now, which is notices. So the intention of this is going to be what works you're basically entitled to do, what works the building owner has the enjoyment of being able to do to his own property, and what notices are required in what scenarios. So I've got some sketches that we can look at up on the screen. So the first one is going to be a line of junction. This will be a section 1 notice. So here, if you are looking, we've got a living room in a rear of a property, and I've got a dashed line between the living room and next door, which is a party wall, and then that continues as a boundary line up through the garden to where we've got that 1100mm dimension at the top. And our client here is looking to build right up to that boundary line. Now this is a line of junction notice. He could also potentially build that wall astride the boundary, so the dashed line runs up the centre of that wall if he had his adjoining owner's consent. Now the thing with this one is that although we're submitting a line of junction notice, we would also need to serve a 3-metre notice, because we're assuming that we're within 3 metres of the adjoining owner's foundations to an assumed greater depth. We obviously are within 3 metres, but we're assuming it's to a greater depth. Okay, so that's section 1, line of junction. Doesn't normally result in a dispute unless you're nearer properties, in which case other parts of the Act may kick in, such as part 6 or part 2. So the second bit we're going to look at is adjoining excavations. Now, touched on this in the second part of my video, but in this example here, we've got a property, an existing residential property that's hatched grey to the right-hand side of the screen. And then at a slight angle, we've got our boundary fence. And then we've got our substantial new block of flats that's going to be built right next to it. So that's only about 2.5 metres away from the adjoining owner. And we're almost certain that the foundations for that are going to be to a greater depth. So a 3-metre notice is served. Now, what we need to be careful of when we're submitting such notices is how close the adjoining owner's property is. Now, in this example here, this was both a 3-metre and a line of junction. You can see it's a bit of a quagmire in the winter here. But next door, look at that, we've got all sorts going on there. We've got the original Victorian rear addition to the property, which you can see about 4 courses down. There's a band. I don't know quite what that band is. This was a few years ago we looked at this. But underneath it, there is no foundations. It's just a 9-inch solid wall straight onto the floor. So we had to get this work backfilled pretty quickly. To the rear of that, we've then got some brickwork with a damp-proof course, and then brick and block work above it. Very poor quality, but that doesn't matter. That's the adjoining owner's extension. Inside, it was absolutely fine. It's a nice kitchen extension, but this is what the adjoining owners have been dealing with or living with without knowing for many years. And then beyond that, we're into normal fence, concrete post, feather edge fence, which doesn't have a property on the other side. So yes, we're assuming that when we're excavating within 3 metres, we are lower than next door's foundations, but it follows that we're actually assuming next door does actually have foundations. It's not always the case. Okay, so that's sections 1 and section 6. The next section is section 3, which is party structure notices. Now there are a whole raft of things that you can do in the legislation. I'll come back to those in a minute. But if we're serving a party structure notice, then that notice needs to be served at least 2 months before works commence. If those works don't commence within 12 months, it's null and void, and you've got to start the process again. When we're serving a section 1 or a section 6 notice, there's a minimum 1 month lead-in time for that. So you've got to give the adjoining owners 1 month's notice of the works that you're doing. Okay, so as part of that notice, there are certain bits of information that you need to include. So you need to include the name and address of the building owner. You would also need to include the name and address of the adjoining owner. And it's generally determined that just addressing it to the owner is not really acceptable. In this day and age, we can do a quick Google search. I think it's just gone, land registry charges just changed from £3 to £6, and you can search up any property and find out who the legal owner is. If you're still struggling, then the Act does say it's a further clause. I'm not going to know which one it is because I've never had to do it. It's on like section 15 or 16 that you can actually write a notice out to the owner if you then go and hand deliver it. So that is an option. You're going to need to tell them what works you're doing. It's not necessarily acceptable just to say works in connection with the party wall. If you're popping a steel beam or proposing to pop a steel beam into that party wall, include the size of the steel beam, include the size of the pad foundation, so someone has got an idea of actually what it is you're doing, not just insertion of steel beams into party walls. That's not particularly great. Sometimes, however, that might be necessary if you don't actually have the structural engineer's information to hand. Your owner may be pressing, or you as a client might be wanting to crack on with this work as soon as you can, and you don't actually have the structural engineer's information yet. So there's kind of workarounds, but you want to include as much information as you can for the benefit of the adjoining owner. And you need to include a date when you're going to start work. Now, there's no prescribed format for serving notices. You can do it in a letter. It has to be in writing, otherwise it's like it never happened. And once you've served that notice, the adjoining owner has got 14 days in which to respond. So it's section 5 that says that they should respond within 14 days. If they decide or they don't want the works, or they just don't respond, then it is deemed that a dispute has arisen. And once that dispute's arisen, they should appoint a surveyor, and you've got your surveyor. So right up to this point, we've looked at all the different parts of the Act, what you can do, what you can't do, although I'm about to come on to section 2 in a minute. And you served your notices. It's not until you tick over that 14-day period that the Party Wall Act effectively kicks in, if you like. So you have obligations to do before that by telling your neighbours what you want to do, by serving notice. But if they sign and say, yeah, it's fine, I'm not fussed, you fill your boots, you do what you want, it's your property, nothing else in that needs to apply. You don't need to appoint surveyors, you don't need to do anything else. When that does happen, I would always recommend people to have a chat with your neighbours, record a schedule of condition of their property, because the smallest of things can set off a bit of a neighbourly dispute. Now, the purpose of the Party Wall Act is to protect the building owner so they can do the works that they're entitled to do, and to protect the adjoining owner in case any damage happens to their property. So I'll give you an example of both. We want to open up a kitchen into a rear addition, and we want to pop a steel beam across onto the party wall to take a structural load bearing wall out. Bog standard, kind of run-of-the-mill everyday work. Now, neighbour says, yeah, absolutely fine, crack on, do what you want, I'm not fussed. And you don't record a schedule of condition, so you don't know the condition of their property. You do your work, and then you have a knock on the door one day. Your blooming builders, they've just knocked these tiles off the wall in my kitchen. Oh, I'm so sorry, I have to go and we'll get that fixed. How do you know they weren't like that beforehand? How do you know there wasn't a crack there beforehand? So if you have that schedule of condition done, it will say that there's cracks on the tiles, there's tiles are loose, you've got tiles coming off the walls. So then you potentially wouldn't be liable for any of that defect work that's happened. Yes, there's always the straw that broke the camel's back. So the tiles may be in poor condition, but if it's your work and vibration that knocks them off, then you may be liable. But let's look at that as well from an adjoining owner's perspective. You've got a wall that's very well tiled, no problems at all. And you say to your neighbour, yep, do what you want, fill your boots, absolutely fine, don't have any problems with it. Next door's knocking and banging about, and you have 3 tiles fall off your wall. You complain to your neighbour, they can, well, prove it wasn't like that before. Instantly backs her up on the defensive or on the aggressive, depending on which side you're on. So just by having that schedule of condition done, it doesn't need to be by a surveyor. Even just, ask your neighbour, can I come around, take a dozen photos, both of you sign the back of them, that's a condition of the property, so you know exactly what it was like before you started work. Okay, so that's section 1, line of junction. Section 6 is adjacent excavations, the information you need on your notices under section 3, and section 5 is your response within 14 days. But the Act also tells you what you can and can't do under section 2 to a party structure. There's some quirky ones in there. I'll let you find and read them. There's a list of 13 things that you can and can't do, and I'll just highlight some for you here. So section 2, subsection A, is you can underpin, thicken or raise a party wall. So if you have a party wall between 2 properties, and it might only be half brick thick, so 100 mil, and you want to pop a steel beam or you want to do other stuff and it's insufficient, you do have a right under the Act to either knock it down and rebuild it, or thicken it, or raise it, or do any of those works. And when I say a right to do it, it's not just you plough ahead and do it. You've still got to serve notice. You've still got to go down the route of the Party Wall Act. But your neighbours can't necessarily say, no, you can't do that, because it's listed as one of the rights that you enjoy to do it. So let's have a look at my screen again, and let's have a look at this photo. So this is a project I did a few years ago. We're opening up taking out 2 load-bearing internal walls. It was a really quirky arrangement in this ground floor shop, that between these walls running up and down the page was a staircase serving a flat upstairs. Both the walls were load-bearing timber framed, and we wanted to take both of them out. So the structural engineers designed 2 fairly substantial beams that have got to go onto the party wall both sides. So it's what I was saying about earlier. This is our run-of-the-mill, everyday party structure notice work for popping a steel beam onto padstones into a wall. So here we have just said, you know, on our notice that we're putting in 203 133 UB30s on, and then we'll specify the size of the padstone, maybe 440 by 215 by 100 padstones set in the party wall. So that's run of the mill. Subsection F, to cut into a party structure for any purposes, including the insertion of a DPC. So you might have been poorly advised by someone that you need a chemical damp proof course. If you've seen any of my videos, you'll know my thoughts on chemical damp proof courses, but that is an option that it does actually specify that under the Act. So that's just one example, but it might be something like this: the insertion of a flashing on a party wall following a roof renewal project like this one. Or you've just bought yourself a lovely old property that's been around for years, and you've still got Mortarbention flashings on the walls like this that you want to take those out and put proper lead flashings in. So that, again, for cutting into a party wall and insertion of a flashing in this circumstance would be subsection J. You're also permitted to cut away any projections, such as foundations and stuff. Now, if we were to go back to our first sketch here, where we didn't have any foundations, if that adjoining owner's property did have normal stepped brick or concrete foundations, then you're permitted to cut those off if they're beyond the boundary line, again, subject to the Act and subject to following the procedures of the Party Wall Act. So once again, this video is, it's 14-15 minutes long, but I feel like I've absolutely whistled through service of notices. There are lots more little nuances to it. So I think from perhaps a student surveyor's perspective, get a copy of the Act, get a copy of the Party Wall Act explained by the Pyramus and Thisbe Club. The RIBA did a party wall book. I've got this very old basic party wall book from the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. Lots of publications out there. It's fairly simple to get started with it, to find your way around the Act and what needs to be done. But once you start getting into it and you start getting more complicated works, such as special foundations and compensation and taking down a party wall when to fully expose it, or when next door still living in a property and you need to take the wall down between the two of you, it gets very, very complicated. If you're an owner or an adjoining owner, have a chat with a local building surveyor. They will know what to do. Although I shall correct myself, as I said in one of my earlier videos, you don't need to appoint any particular kind of surveyor. They don't need to be chartered, but if you pick up the phone to a chartered building surveyor local to you, you'll know that you're going to get reasonable service. You're going to get someone that's got insurance back in as their PI insurance, and someone that knows what they're doing. Or give us a call. Got our details down there. Drop us an email to info@west1, and we can assist if it's London and the South East. So that is a bit of a whistle-stop tour around party walls. I'll go on to a few other bits and pieces in my next video, such as the Party Wall Award and schedules of condition, and we'll take it from there. I'll try not to do too many more videos, but very much appreciate your time and watching. Thank you for getting this far. If you like what we're doing, please like and subscribe, and that will greatly help out our channel. It'll be bloody marvellous, and I shall see you on the next one. Thank you very much.